They say a mother always knows her children. But what if her eyes have never opened? What if her touch has become the only truth in a house where mirrors were forbidden, windows were bricked shut, and every face carried the same cursed jawline? It began in the hills of Appalachia, not the kind you find on postcards, but the kind you don't return from, where the roads end in gravel and the silence speaks louder than any preacher. A place where no birth certificates were ever filed and no graves were ever marked. The house stood alone, sagging under the weight of its own rot, guarded by a woman they called Mamie. She hadn't seen the sun in 40 years, not because she chose the dark, but because her eyes had withered away in their sockets, as if refusing to witness what she had brought into the world. They say she raised 11 children, all from her own blood, but the family Bible only had 7 names, and of those 7, 3 were written over in thick smeared ink, as if the past had tried to erase itself. Locals remember the sounds before they remember the faces. Shrieks in the middle of the night, rhythmic stomping, as if someone were pacing in circles for hours, a baby crying long past the age it should have learned to speak. They remember the fence, 8 feet tall, rusted barbed wire, twisted around the property like a crown of thorns, but no dogs, no animals, just the faint smell of kerosene and milk that had gone sour. Most never got close enough to see the children, but those who did wish they hadn't. Pale faces with matching slants, eyes that didn't quite align, hands that were too long, as if built for grasping things they were never meant to hold, and always, always barefoot, even in the snow. They called them the touchborn, because Mamie claimed she could tell who was kin just by touching their skulls. She'd press her fingers to their temples and murmur in a tongue no one understood. If she nodded, the child was kept. If not, well, the field behind the house never grew anything, not even weeds. There's a photograph, just one, faded, warped by moisture, with corners that flake off if you breathe too hard. It shows a porch, splintered and sagging, with 7 children lined up like broken dolls, all staring at the camera, except one, the smallest. His head turned sideways, mouth parted like he was mid-sentence. But no one remembers his name, no one even remembers who took the picture. It just appeared one day on the bulletin board at the gas station, tacked up under a missing dog poster. By nightfall, it was gone. What people didn't understand, what they refused to understand, was that this wasn't some tragic family trapped by poverty or misfortune. This was design, intentional, deliberate. Mamie didn't marry out. She didn't believe in it. She said outsiders carried disease, not illness of the body, but of the spirit. She believed the outside world was poisoned with greed, lies, and lust. So she bred her children like cattle, selectively, repeatedly, and without shame, not out of madness, but out of mission. The community whispered, but no one intervened. Not the sheriff, not the pastor, not even the state, because this wasn't Los Angeles, this wasn't Boston, this was Wren Hollow, population under 100 and dropping. The land was harsh, the winters harsher, and people had their own secrets to keep. So long as Mamie's clan stayed behind that fence, nobody came knocking. But inside the house, a different story played out. No books, no clocks, no mirrors. The children learned to speak by mimicking each other, learned to walk by following the patterns worn into the floorboards. Food was left at the doorstep by a cousin who wouldn't speak her name aloud. Medicine was brewed from roots and mushrooms, none of which had names in any medical book. Mamie sat in her rocking chair, blind eyes rolled to the sky, and listened. She always listened, every cough, every stoose, emble, every whimper behind a closed door. Nothing escaped her. She spoke in riddles, in scripture that didn't come from any Bible printed in Nashville. Her voice was soft, but it held the kind of weight that silences a room. The children feared her, loved her, needed her, and that's exactly how she wanted it. It was the youngest boy who tried to leave first. They say he was 14, but he looked younger, small-boned, pale as ash, with a face that seemed both too old and too unfinished. His name, whispered in the breath of an old storekeeper, was Elam. He'd taken to standing by the fence for hours, fingers wrapped around the wire, eyes tracking the birds overhead. Birds were the only things he ever saw leave and return without punishment. One night, in the dead cold of February, Elam slipped through a gap beneath the fence where the earth had caved inward. He didn't get far. 3 miles through the woods, barefoot and shivering, before he was found by a man hunting foxes. The man took one look at him and didn't ask questions, just wrapped him in his coat and drove him to town. But Elam didn't speak. Not at first. He flinched when anyone touched him. He stared at his own reflection like it was something foreign, and when a nurse handed him a mirror, he smashed it on the floor, curled into the corner, and screamed a single word: "Mother." By the time child services arrived, Mamie had already boarded up the house. No children outside, no movement inside, just silence. The fence had been reinforced with scrap metal and twisted tree limbs. The sheriff knocked once, then again, no answer. The house refused to respond, like a corpse unwilling to decay. Elam didn't last long in care. He refused to eat unless the food came from a tin can. He cried at the sight of curtains. One night they found him in the backyard of the group home, digging a hole with his bare hands. He kept whispering about the unseen ones under the field. Said Mamie told them bedtime stories, stories of what happens to children who betray their blood. Then he disappeared, walked out barefoot into a snowstorm, and was never seen again. People in Wren Hollow didn't ask questions. Those who passed the house saying they saw figures behind the curtains again, a candle burning in the attic, and sometimes, just sometimes, they swore they heard Mamie singing, a lullaby with no words, just hums and long, low moans, like the sound of mourning something that had never been born right. In 1974, a state investigator named Ruth Delaney was sent to Wren Hollow after an anonymous tip claimed multiple unregistered births had occurred on the same property for over 30 years. Ruth wasn't the sort to scare easily. She had worked cases in the worst parts of Baton Rouge, where she'd seen everything from ritual abuse to backwoods medicine, but Wren Hollow unsettled her in a way she couldn't explain. It wasn't just the isolation, it was the way people stared at her, not with anger, but with a kind of warning. When she reached the house, Ruth found no welcome. The gate was padlocked, the mailbox stuffed with moldy paper. She knocked. No answer. She circled the property, notebook in hand, her boots sinking into the earth like the land wanted to pull her under. That's when she noticed the dolls. Dozens of them, hanging from the trees, made of sticks and cloth. Each one twisted, malformed, some with 3 arms, some with no faces at all, strung with twine and old shoelaces, swaying in the breeze. She took photos, later destroyed in a fire no one could explain. Ruth returned with 2 deputies the next morning. They forced the door open. What they found inside never made it into any report. The interior was pitch dark, windows covered with nailed planks, layers of soot on the walls. Beds were carved into the floors, straw mattresses soaked in old blood and something worse. Carvings everywhere, symbols, spirals, words in no known language. The children were silent, hiding. When they found them, most didn't run. They just stared, heads tilted, arms limp at their sides like they were waiting for instructions. Then they found Mamie. She was sitting upright in her chair, dead for days. Her eyes still open, milky and unblinking, mouth slightly agape, like she'd died mid-command. Her hands were raw, split open at the knuckles, the skin rubbed smooth in patches from decades of feeling her way across every inch of that cursed home. No autopsy was released, no burial was recorded. Ruth left the case days later, moved states, changed names. Some say she tried to forget. Others say she never stopped hearing that house in her dreams, breathing, humming, watching. And no one ever figured out who placed the dolls in her yard 3 weeks later, or why each one looked exactly like the children Mamie raised. If you're still watching, you're already braver than most. Tell us in the comments, what would you have done if this was your bloodline? After the raid, the state took the surviving children, 6 in total. None had legal names, no birth records, no schooling. They spoke in short, clipped phrases, their vocabulary stunted, shaped by isolation and whatever language Mamie had invented for them. But what disturbed their caretakers most wasn't what the children said, it was how they moved. They didn't blink often, they rarely slept. They sat for hours without speaking or shifting, eyes fixed on blank walls. They didn't cry, they didn't laugh. It was as if the mechanics of emotion had been broken, like the wiring of something human had been stripped out and replaced with mimicry. The youngest girl, the one they called June, began drawing. Not animals, not people, but rooms. Over and over, the same room, a square chamber with no doors, no windows, just an old chair in the middle, and always, a woman sitting in it, eyes closed, mouth open, her hands stretched out as if feeling for something that wasn't there. When asked who the woman was, June said, "She hears us still, even now." The children were separated, placed in different facilities across the state. But strange reports followed each one. Caretakers quitting after unexplained nosebleeds, other children waking up with identical bruises in the shape of fingers. One boy in another ward had a seizure while sleeping in the same building as one of Mamie's sons. His final words before losing consciousness, "The touch is still alive." 3 of the 6 died before reaching adulthood. One threw himself from a second-story window without a word. Another was found drowned in an empty bathtub, no water, no signs of struggle. The third simply disappeared during a fire drill, though no doors were left open and no alarms went off. Only one ever spoke publicly. A grown man years later, in a recorded interview that never aired, he stared into the camera with a calm, hollow gaze and said, "She made us perfect. She said the sickness was in the outside, but we were clean, because we never left. We were never meant to leave." The tape was confiscated, the station burned down months later, and no one ever found out how he knew Ruth Delaney's name, or why he had a photograph of her folded neatly in his pocket. The house was condemned, but it didn't fall. Crews came to tear it down, but their equipment broke. Twice. One worker refused to go inside, claiming he heard a child whisper his name from under the floorboards. Another went in alone and came out vomiting, insisting the walls had moved while he was in the hallway. Not shaken by wind, not cracked by age. Moved, like breathing, like bracing for something. Eventually they sealed it, welded steel across the front entrance, nailed shut every opening, poured concrete over the cellar door, but the locals still avoided the road. Even the wild animals steered clear. Birds didn't nest in the trees above it. Stray dogs howled at it from a distance, then backed away without turning around. It sat like that for years, silent, forgotten, unspoken. Until 1992, when a pair of urban explorers broke in with a handheld camera. They laughed at first, made jokes about hillbilly vampires and backwoods witches. But within minutes of entering, the footage changes, the tone shifts, their voices lower. They start whispering even though no one else is around. In the footage, they walk through rooms that had no light source, but where shadows move, not fast, not violent, just moving. One boy, his name was Cal, kept wiping his arms, saying it felt like someone was brushing past him. The other, Mickey, said he kept hearing a rocking chair creaking, even though none were visible. Then the camera tilts. Mickey drops it. You hear a scream, not loud, but raw, wet, like something caught in his throat. When the camera is picked back up, Mickey's gone. Cal is breathing hard, whispering, "Don't touch me. I'm not one of them." He finds the front door welded shut again, even though they came through it an hour before. The last 30 seconds of the tape show him crouched in the corner of the main room, crying. Behind him, in the darkness, a voice hums along to a I'm so away. Lullaby, slow, rhythmic, familiar. The tape was found in an abandoned backpack 6 miles away. Cal was never found. Mickey's bones were discovered 5 years later, scattered in a cave system with no known entrance. Some pieces were never recovered. His jaw was missing. The rocking chair, according to investigators, was back in its place, unmoved. Years passed, names faded, files were sealed. Wren Hollow emptied out like blood from a deep wound, slow, silent, permanent. But the story didn't die. It lingered in whispers, resurfaced in nightmares, and carved itself into the landscape like rot under paint. People talk about Mamie like a ghost, but ghosts don't raise children. Ghosts don't dig their fingers into generations and shape them like wet clay. Mamie was no phantom. She was a force, a design, a belief system in human skin. What she did wasn't madness, it was philosophy, a conviction that the world outside was broken, and only by folding in, folding tighter generation by generation, could something pure survive. Her children weren't just inbred, they were engineered, soft-spoken, hollowed out, built to obey, built to never question, and when the state tried to scatter them, the roots pulled tighter. They whispered through walls, they sent pieces of themselves in envelopes with no return address. Ruth Delaney's niece still receives blank postcards every July, always postmarked from different states, always with the same crude drawing, a blindfolded woman sitting in a chair, smiling. What happened in that house wasn't an isolated tragedy. It was a system passed down like scripture, hidden from view, but never gone. Because monsters don't just disappear. They adapt, they change names, change faces, change homes. Some say the surviving children had children of their own, quietly, secretly. Some say those children were placed in small, unassuming towns where no one asks too many questions, where the kids are strange, too quiet, too still, drawn to corners, terrified of mirrors. Some say you've already met one of them, maybe in a diner, maybe at the DMV, maybe in your own family, because horror like this doesn't live in haunted houses, it lives in bloodlines, in silence, in rituals repeated so many times they no longer seem cruel, just tradition. The house still stands, of course. They say if you stand close enough on a windless night you can hear the floorboards creak, not with footsteps, but with breathing, shallow, rhythmic, like someone is still sitting there, waiting. And if you're ever driving through the Appalachian backroads and you see a child barefoot in the snow, staring through a fence with blank eyes and an old face, don't stop. Some families were never meant to be remembered, and some bloodlines were never meant to leave the dark.